The day James Anderson turned 18, the system let him go without ceremony. No cake, no handshakes, just Linda Brown's tight smile across a gray metal desk in the Cedar County Services Building. Outside the window, December pressed against the glass, all slate sky and naked branches. Linda slid a manila envelope across the desk. Inside a birth certificate, a social security card, and three $20 bills that felt thin as paper promises. Her voice carried the practiced warmth of someone who'd done this 100 times before. Good luck out there, James. Out there, as if the world beyond this building was a foreign country he'd never visited, which, in a way, it was. 17 different foster homes had taught him that temporary was the only permanent thing in his life. Now he stood in the lobby with everything he owned compressed into a duffel bag that smelled like donated clothes and other people's detergent. The cold hit him the moment he pushed through the double doors. Iowa, winter, the kind that didn't just chill your skin, but invaded your bones. Turned your breath to fog, made you wonder if spring was a collective lie everyone agreed to believe. He pulled his jacket tighter. The fabric was too thin, bought from a thrift store 2 years ago, when he'd been smaller, hungrier, more convinced that next year would be different. $87 in his wallet now, after buying the jacket after 3 months of washing dishes at a diner that closed when the owner's wife got sick. The math was brutal and simple. Food or shelter, never both. A week in a motel room or 3 weeks of meals. Choose. The wind cut down Main Street like it had somewhere better to be. James walked without direction, just movement to stay warm, passing storefronts decorated with Christmas lights that seemed to mock him with their cheerful certainty. Inside those buildings, people had places to return to. Addresses, keys, the kind of small permanence he'd spent 18 years learning not to want. By the time the sun started its early winter descent, his fingers had gone numb, and his stomach had progressed past hunger into a hollow ache he recognized from childhood. A diner's neon sign flickered ahead, red letters spelling "Open, 24 hours," like a promise. He pushed through the door into a wall of warm air and coffee smell. The waitress didn't look up from her crossword when he slid into a corner booth. He ordered coffee black, the cheapest thing on the menu. 80 cents. She brought it in a white ceramic mug with a chip on the rim, filled it to the brim, without asking if he wanted cream. Hours passed. The coffee turned cold, got refilled, turned cold again. Other customers came and went, their conversations washing over him in waves he didn't try to catch. He counted his money under the table, refolding the bills into different configurations, as if that might somehow make them multiply. The waitress's shift ended at 11. The new one, younger with bleached hair and tired eyes, stopped by his booth with the coffee pot held like a weapon. Her voice had edges. "You ordering food or just camping out?" James looked up, met her gaze, saw the calculation happening behind her eyes. She'd already decided he was trouble, the kind of kid who'd skip out on a bill. He pulled out a $5 bill, set it on the table. "Just coffee. I'll leave when you close." Something in her expression shifted, not quite sympathy, but close enough. She refilled his cup without charging him, moved on to the next table. At 2 in the morning, she told him they didn't actually close, but he should probably find somewhere else to be. He left the 5 on the table, walked back out into cold that had deepened while he'd been inside, temperature dropping into the teens. The emergency shelter on Birch Street had a line of 6 people waiting outside when he arrived. A man with a clipboard stood at the door, checking names against a list. James waited his turn, watched two people get turned away, understood before he reached the front that the answer would be no. The clipboard man didn't apologize. "We're at capacity. Try the church on 5th. The church was locked. 5th Street was dark. James's breath came out in clouds that disappeared into nothing. He found himself on a bench in Veterans Memorial Park concrete, cold enough to burn through his jeans. Sleep felt impossible but necessary, a contradiction his body tried to negotiate through shivers. He pulled everything from his duffel bag, layered 2 shirts over the one he wore, wrapped a towel around his neck like a scarf. It helped barely. Sometime before dawn, another person appeared on the next bench over. Male, maybe 19, black, with a North Face jacket that had seen better years but still had its original stuffing. He nodded at James, a gesture of recognition between people who shared the same cold mathematics. His voice was rough, but not unkind. "First night out here." James managed a nod, jaw too tight from shivering to trust words. The stranger reached into his backpack, pulled out a space blanket, one of those emergency mylar things that looked like aluminum foil. He tossed it over. "Name's Brandon Clark, aged out last February." James caught the blanket, wrapped it around his shoulders. The material crinkled, but trapped heat. "James Anderson, aged out yesterday." Brandon's laugh had no humor in it. "Yeah, December's a bitch for timing. Listen, there's a 24-hour laundromat on 7th. Warm, nobody bothers you if you pretend to wait for your clothes. Better than freezing." He stood, shouldered his pack, started to walk away. Then stopped, turned back. His words carried weight. "First winter kills you or makes you. Figure out which one you're gonna be." James spent the rest of that night in the laundromat, sitting on an orange plastic chair that smelled like fabric softener, watching someone else's clothes tumble in circles behind a glass door. The warmth felt like forgiveness he hadn't earned. Morning came gray and reluctant. He left the laundromat when the owner arrived, a Vietnamese woman who glared at him but didn't ask questions. Outside, the temperature had climbed to maybe 20 degrees. Progress of a sort. His stomach demanded attention, now the kind of hunger that made thinking hard. He bought 2 granola bars and a bottle of water from a gas station. $87 became $83. The public library opened at 9. He knew this because he'd spent summers there during middle school, back when his foster placement had been with the Hendersons, who believed television rotted brains. He'd hated them then. Now he felt something close to gratitude for the knowledge. Inside the library smelled like old paper and new carpet, a combination that meant safety in a language he understood. The children's section burbled with toddlers and exhausted parents. The reference desk sat empty, presided over by a woman in her late 40s with steel gray hair pulled back in a bun so tight that it must have hurt. He found a table in the back corner, sat down, tried to look purposeful. The warmth seeped into him slowly, loosening muscles he hadn't realized were clenched. Sleep ambushed him somewhere around 11. He woke to the librarian's hand on his shoulder, gentle but firm. Her name tag read, Patricia Moore. Her voice stayed quiet, meant only for him. "We close at 6. You can stay till then, but you can't sleep here." James sat up, wiped his mouth, felt shame burn through the fog in his head. "Sorry, I wasn't—" She cut him off with a look that wasn't unkind. "I know what you weren't doing. There's coffee in the break room. Help yourself. Just stay awake." She walked away before he could respond, disappearing into the stacks. The coffee was weak and lukewarm, but it was free and it was hot. He drank 2 cups, felt human again, or close enough. On his way back to his corner table, he passed the community bulletin board. flyers for yoga classes, used cars lost cats, and buried under a notice about summer reading programs, a single white sheet with bold black letters. County equipment, auction farm machinery, tools, vehicles, Saturday, 9 a.m., Thompson's yard. Everything must go Saturday, tomorrow. James pulled out his phone, the cheap prepaid thing that only had $12 left on it. The address put the auction yard 6 miles outside town, past the Agricultural Extension Office, where Cedar County faded into fields. He didn't know anything about farm equipment, didn't know why the flyer made his heart beat faster or why his hand moved to the money in his pocket, counting bills through fabric. But something in the words, "everything must go," felt like they were speaking directly to him. He photographed the flyer with his phone, studied it later that evening in the laundromat, while pretending to fold clothes he didn't own. Brandon showed up around 9, bought a Coke from the vending machine, sat down 2 chairs away. His voice carried exhaustion. "Still alive, I see." James nodded toward the photo on his phone. "You know anything about farm equipment?" Brandon leaned over, squinted at the screen, laughed. "Man, you trying to become a farmer now? With what money?" The question hung between them. James had $83. Tomorrow's auction meant bidders with trucks with land, with the kind of money that counted in thousands. But something about the flyer wouldn't let go. He'd learned early that opportunities rarely announced themselves with trumpets. More often they showed up as stupid risks that sounded insane until they worked. His voice came out more certain than he felt. "Just looking." Saturday arrived wrapped in gray skies, threatening snow. James started walking. At 7, wanted to arrive early, see what he was dealing with. The road out of town, narrowed houses, giving way to farm fields dormant under winter-broken cornstalks, pointing at nothing. Thompson's yard announced itself with a hand-painted sign and a gravel lot already half full with pickup trucks. Diesel fumes mixed with cold airmen in Carhartt jackets stood in clusters, breath-fogging voices carrying across frozen mud. James felt completely wrong the moment he stepped into the lot. His sneakers, his thin jacket, the lack of any vehicle at all. Everything marked him as someone who didn't belong. Eyes tracked him, dismissed him, moved on to more interesting subjects. The equipment sat in rows. Tractors, combines, plows, machinery he couldn't name, all arranged like cars on a used lot. Most looked maintained, paint fresh enough, tires inflated. The expensive stuff. And then, alone in the back corner, like something everyone had agreed to forget, he saw it. The tractor might have been Greenman's, maybe John Deere green, but rust had claimed most of that dream. Both front tires sagged flat. The seat had a crack running through it. The steering wheel bent slightly, left. The whole machine slumped like a boxer who'd taken too many hits. But something about it pulled at him. He walked over, ran his hand along the cold metal, felt ridges and valleys where paint had surrendered to time. A voice cut through his inspection, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You lost, son." James turned. The man stood 6 feet easy, 50 or so, wearing clean work clothes and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. His jacket had a name embroidered on it, Michael Thompson. James straightened, met his gaze. "No, sir, just looking." Michael's laugh invited others to join. "Looking at what, that pile of scrap? You thinking about buying it?" The question felt like a test. Around them, conversations had paused, attention turning their way. James understood he was being measured, found wanting, invited to prove everyone's assumptions correct by walking away. His jaw tightened. "Maybe." That got more laughs. Michael shook his head, playing to his audience now. Son, that thing hasn't run since before you were born. Transmissions shot, engines seized. It's not a tractor, it's 2 tons of rust waiting for someone to haul it to scrap. Someone behind Michael added their own commentary. Kid's gonna learn an expensive lesson. The auctioneer's voice crackled over a portable PA system announcing the start. James watched Michael and his group move toward the front, still chuckling. They'd already forgotten him, dismissed as someone too broke and stupid to matter. Good, let them think that. The auction moved fast. Equipment sold in minutes, bidding wars between farmers who knew values, who raised hands with confidence built on years of knowing soil and machinery. James waited, watched, learned the rhythm. Lot 47 came up just before noon. The auctioneer's voice carried resignation. Next we got a 1952 John Deere Model A. Needs work. Hell, needs a miracle. Who wants to start at, let's say, $50? Silence. The tractor sat there in its corner, judged and found worthless. The auctioneer tried again. Okay, 25. Still nothing. People had started talking among themselves, moving on mentally to the next lot. James's hand moved before his brain caught up. His voice came out steady. $90. The lot went quiet in a way that felt like holding breath. The auctioneer blinked, looked around, like he expected someone to explain the joke. When no one did, his gavel came down. Sold to the young man for $90. You got yourself a project son. James walked to the payment table, pulled out 9 $10 bills, watched them disappear into a cash box. A woman handed him a receipt and a form for the county land bank. Her tone suggested she'd seen this before, and it never ended well. You got 72 hours to move it, or we scrap it. There's a county lot on Route 34, abandoned property. You can store it there. No one's used it in years. $90? He had 12 left now. No food plan, no shelter plan, just a receipt for a machine that everyone agreed was worthless. But it was his. The tow truck driver charged $50 to haul the tractor to the Route 34 lot. James watched his remaining money dwindle, felt panic try to set in, pushed it down through force of will. The lot sat exactly where worthless things went to be forgotten. 2 acres of frozen mud and dead grass, surrounded by trees on 3 sides, empty foundation markers where buildings used to stand. The driver unhooked the tractor, left it sitting there like an accusation. His parting words carried the weight of experience. You sure about this, kid? James wasn't sure about anything, but he nodded anyway. Alone with his purchase, James did inventory. The tractor was worse up close. He climbed into the seat, felt metal cold enough to burn through his jeans. The steering wheel turned loosely, disconnected from any mechanism. The gear shift stuck halfway. He tried the ignition, knowing it was stupid, hoping anyway. Nothing, not even a click. Night came early in December. James used the last of daylight to drag scrap wood from the foundation pile. Lean pieces against the tractor's side tie, a blue tarp between the wood and a metal post, he pounded into frozen ground with a rock. The shelter took 2 hours to build and wouldn't stop wind, but it was something. Inside his lean-to, sitting on ground, hard as concrete, James opened his duffel and counted what he had left. $12, 1 granola bar, a phone with $10 of minutes, and a tractor everyone said was beyond saving. The temperature dropped below 20. Wind found every gap in his tarp, every opening in his clothes. He wrapped himself in every layer he owned, pulled the space blanket Brandon had given him over everything else, and tried to sleep. Cold woke him every 15 minutes. His body shivered so hard his teeth hurt. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, he stopped shivering entirely, which some distant part of his brain recognized as a bad sign. He stood moved, did jumping jacks, until feeling returned to his fingers, then sat back down and waited for dawn. Morning arrived as a gray suggestion. James's whole body ached. His throat felt raw, his head stuffed with cotton. But he was alive, which felt like victory enough. The walk to the library took longer than usual. His legs didn't want to cooperate, muscles tight from cold and inadequate sleep. But Patricia Moore opened the doors at 9 sharp, and warmth existed in the world again. He went straight to the reference section, pulled every book about farm equipment he could carry. Most were decades old, their information outdated, but the basics stayed the same. Engines, transmissions, hydraulics, how things worked when they worked, what broke when they didn't. Patricia appeared at his table around noon, set down a paper bag. Her voice stayed matter-of-fact. Tuna sandwich. Someone left it, claimed they were allergic. You want it. They both knew no one had left anything. James looked up at her, saw something in her expression that wasn't pity, but recognition, like she'd been cold once too. He took the sandwich. "Thank you." She walked away, without acknowledging his words, disappeared back into the ordered world of books and silence, where kindness could be offered without having to name it. He ate slowly, making it last, reading between bites. The manuals spoke a language he only half understood. Torque specifications, compression ratios, valve clearances. But pictures helped, diagrams showed him what words couldn't explain. By the time the library closed, James had filled a notebook with sketches and notes, a rough map of what his tractor should look like inside. The walk back to his lot felt longer in darkness. No moon, just black sky and colder air. He used his phone's flashlight to navigate the last quarter mile, preserving battery by walking in darkness when the path seemed clear. At the lot, his tarp shelter waited like a judgment. He'd added nothing improved nothing. Tomorrow, he'd have to start actually working on the tractor, and he had exactly 0 tools, 0 parts, and 0 experience. The absurdity of his situation hit him standing there in the dark. $90 for a machine he couldn't fix, sleeping in a tarp tent on frozen ground, reading library books like they'd magically teach him skills that took people years to learn. He climbed into the tractor's seat more for routine than comfort. The metal felt cold, as always, except his hand stopped. The seat wasn't frozen solid like it should be. Not warm, but not the brutal ice of metal left outside all night. James pressed his palm flat against it, waited, felt something. A difference. Wrong word, wrong feeling, but undeniably there. He pulled his hand back, pressed it to the tractor's body. Frozen. The steering wheel. Frozen. The metal panel. Frozen. Back to the seat. That odd, not quite warmth. His engineering brain tried to explain it. Residual heat from his body during the day. Except he'd only sat here once for 5 minutes 12 hours ago. Metal different composition, holding temperature differently. Except the whole seat was uniform metal. James sat down properly, let his weight settle. If anything, the sensation increased, like the machine was trying to tell him something in a language he didn't speak yet. He spent the night in the seat instead of on the ground. Sleep came in fragments, dream mixing with cold reality, but he woke alive when dawn came, and that was enough. 4 days became a week. James fell into rhythm born of necessity. Library opened at 9. He arrived at 8:30 to be first through the door. read until the afternoon crowd made his table too visible, walk back to the lot work until darkness made seeing impossible, sleep a few hours, repeat. Patricia stopped pretending the sandwiches were abandoned. She brought them wrapped in wax paper, set them down without comment, walked away before he could complicate it with gratitude. The reading taught him what he needed to know. His tractor was comprehensively broken. Transmission gear cracked, fuel system corroded, electrical system non-existent, piston rings seized. The list of problems felt longer every time he checked, but knowing what was wrong felt like progress, even if fixing it remained impossible without tools, parts, or more money. On day 8, James started scavenging. The county maintenance yard had a pile of discarded equipment behind a chain-link fence. He waited until evening when workers went home, then dug through rusted metal and broken machines looking for anything that might fit a 1952 tractor. He found a fuel line corroded but salvageable, a length of wire thick enough for electrical work, bolts in 3 different sizes. The security guard caught him on day 10. Older guy, white hair, heavy coat. He stood at the fence line, watching James try to extract a seized bolt from a discarded engine block. His voice carried more curiosity than anger. "What are you doing, kid?" James considered running, calculated he wouldn't make it over the fence in time, opted for truth. "Looking for parts." The guard's flashlight swept over James's thin jacket, his cracked hands the desperation barely hidden under determination. Something in his expression softened. He pointed at the pile. "You got 10 minutes. Take what you can carry. If I see you again, I call the police." James worked fast. The fuel line, the wire, a handful of bolts, a socket wrench, missing 2 sockets, but still functional. He stuffed everything into his jacket, climbed the fence, didn't look back. That night, he cleaned the fuel line with snow, scraped away rust, until metal showed through. Small progress, meaningless progress, but his progress nonetheless. Brandon found him on day 12. James was sitting by the tractor, trying to remove a seized bolt with pliers, making no headway. Footsteps crunched on frozen ground, and Brandon appeared with a backpack and cautious expression. His voice had edges. "Been asking around about you. People say you bought a tractor." James gestured at the machine. "People are right." Brandon walked a slow circle around it, taking in the rust, the flat tires, the obvious impossibility of the situation. When he completed his inspection, he shook his head. The words came out almost kind. "Man, what were you thinking?" James didn't have a good answer. He'd asked himself the same question 50 times, come up with 50 versions of "I don't know." Brandon sat down on the ground, pulled out a package of cookies, offered one. James took it, the sugar hitting his system like medicine. They ate in silence for a while. Then Brandon spoke again, quieter this time. "I got a job. Meatpacking plant, overnight shift. Pays shit hours or worse, but it's money." He paused, pulled something from his backpack. A sleeping bag, thick and green, the kind rated for actual cold. "Found this at the Salvation Army. Thought you could use it." James stared at the sleeping bag, felt something crack in his chest. Kindness from someone who had almost nothing, who understood exactly how close to the edge they both lived. He took the sleeping bag, managed 2 words. "Thank you." Brandon stood, shouldered his pack. "County's clearing this lot in spring. Development deal or some shit. You got maybe 4 months." The information landed like a punch. James had known the lot couldn't last forever, but knowing and having a timeline felt different. 4 months, 16 weeks, 120 days to either fix this tractor or watch it get scraped. His voice came out steady. "Then I better get to work." Brandon's expression shifted into something close to respect. "Yeah, I guess you better." He left footsteps fading into distance. James unrolled the sleeping bag, felt its weight, its promise of warmth. That night, he slept 6 hours straight, the first real sleep since Linda Brown had smiled her goodbye. Patricia noticed the change in his reading. He'd moved past basic repair manuals into specialized texts, diagrams of transmission assemblies, metallurgy guides explaining stress fractures. She started bringing books from her own collection volumes, not in the library's catalog, left them on his table without explanation. Week 3 arrived with no progress on the tractor. James had cleaned parts, organized bolts, mapped every system in his notebook, but actual repair required tools and knowledge he didn't have. The gap between understanding what needed to happen and making it happen felt infinite. On a Tuesday that felt colder than any before it, Patricia stopped at his table during lunch. Her voice carried the careful neutrality of someone about to change things. She met his eyes. "I'm not going to insult you by pretending I don't know you're homeless." James felt his face heat, started to deny. It stopped. She knew. Everyone probably knew. His daily routine, his obvious desperation, the way he made library hours stretch from opening to closing. Patricia continued, not unkind. "My mother grew up during the Depression. Tenant farmers lost everything when the dust came. She used to tell me about that look people get when they're one bad day from giving up." She paused, let the words settle. Her next sentence came quietly. "You've got that look, James, but you also have something else. You keep coming back. That counts for something." James didn't trust his voice, just nodded. Patricia pulled out a business card, set it on his notes. "There's someone who can help. Hardware store owner woman named Barbara Harris. Her husband Donald used to be a farm mechanic before his stroke. He can't speak well anymore, but his hands still know things his mouth can't explain. Tell her I sent you." The card felt heavy in James's hand, weighted with possibility and fear. Help meant obligation, meant owing people, meant opening himself up to disappointment when they inevitably decided he wasn't worth the trouble. But the tractor sat frozen in its lot, and spring crept closer every day, and his list of options had exactly one item on it. He met Patricia's gaze. "Why are you helping me?" Her answer came simple. "Because someone helped me once, and I didn't forget." Harris Hardware sat on 3rd Street, painted blue, with clean windows and a sign advertising power tools. James stood outside for 10 minutes, building courage before pushing through the door. Inside smelled like lumber and motor oil, organized chaos of inventory stacked on metal shelves. A woman at the register looked up, sharp eyes assessing him in one glance. Late 50s white hair, pulled back expression that suggested she'd seen every kind of customer and wasn't impressed by any of them. Her voice carried authority. "Help you find something." James pulled out Patricia's card, his rehearsed speech evaporating under her gaze. "Patricia Moore sent me. Said your husband might." Barbara Harris's expression shifted, recognition lighting. "Patricia sent you? That means something." She called toward the back. "Donald got someone here you should meet." The man who emerged walked slowly leftward side, dragging slightly face asymmetrical from the stroke. But his eyes stayed sharp, and when he looked at James, something passed between them. Recognition of a different kind. Barbara got straight to it. "Patricia says you're trying to fix a '52 Model A. with library books and prayer. James felt heat climb his neck. Put that way, his situation sounded pathetic even to him. But Barbara wasn't mocking. She looked at Donald, some silent communication passing between them. Donald pulled out a small notepad, wrote carefully with his right hand. He turned it for James to read. Engine heart, transmission brain, respect both. Barbara translated the philosophy behind the words. Donald spent 40 years teaching people to fix what everyone else throws away. He doesn't talk much anymore, but he can teach if you can learn. She laid out terms like a contract. 3 times a week you come here after closing. Donald shows you what he knows. In exchange, you work the store. 10 hours weekly minimum wage. We've got a basement workshop. You can use it to clean parts. Storage room upstairs hasn't been used in years. Needs cleaning anyway. The offer hung between them, too good to be real. James waited for the catch, the condition that would make it impossible. Barbara's voice stayed level. 3 rules. No stealing, no lying, no quitting. Donald wrote again, can you follow rules? James thought about 17 foster homes, 17 sets of different rules. He'd broken most of them, eventually proving every disappointed face right. But this felt different. This felt like something worth not breaking. He looked at Donald, then Barbara made a decision that felt like jumping off a cliff. Yes, ma'am. I can follow rules. Barbara's nod sealed it. Good. You start tomorrow. Bring your list of what's wrong with that tractor. Let's see what Donald thinks. Walking out of Harris Hardware, James felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Not quite hope, too fragile for that, but possibility. The dangerous kind that makes you believe things might actually work out. The dangerous kind that makes you care. Donald's first lesson happened in the basement workshop at 7 p.m. on a Wednesday that smelled like sawdust and machine oil. The space ran narrow and long workbenches lining both walls, tools organized with the precision of someone who knew exactly where everything lived. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in harsh white. Donald moved to the main bench, gestured for James to stand beside him. From a drawer, he pulled an old carburetor, disassembled into 20 pieces, laid them out in sequence. His right hand moved steadily despite the tremor, arranging components like words in a sentence. He wrote on his notepad, turned it, know the order, chaos breaks engines. James studied the layout, committing it to memory. Donald waited exactly 30 seconds, then swept everything into a coffee can, dumped the pieces out, randomized. He pointed at James, then at the scattered parts. The lesson was clear. James started sorting, identifying pieces by shape and wear patterns. 3 mistakes before he got it right. Donald nodded, once swept them back into chaos, made James do it again. They repeated the exercise 7 times before Donald wrote, muscle memory. Hands learn what brain forgets. The second lesson focused on diagnosis through sound. Donald had collected recordings, somehow played them through an old speaker. Engine knocking, transmission, grinding, hydraulic wine exhaust leak. Each sound distinct if you knew what to listen for. James closed his eyes, let the mechanical symphony wash over him. Donald played one, paused, wrote the diagnosis, made James guess before showing the answer. 12 sounds, James got 4 correct. Donald's next note read, better than most, you hear differences. By the 3rd session, they'd moved to actual repair. Donald brought out a seized piston assembly, showed James how to apply penetrating oil, where to tap with a rubber mallet, how to feel for the moment when metal decided to forgive and release. The breakthrough came at 11 p.m., the piston sliding free with a sound like exhaling. James felt something shift in his understanding, the gap between reading and doing narrowing to something crossable. Donald wrote, "Tonight you became mechanic, small mechanic, but mechanic." The storage room upstairs turned out to be larger than James expected. 12 by 12 feet, one window facing 3rd Street, a radiator that actually worked. Boxes filled half the space, old inventory nobody had bothered moving. Barbara handed him garbage bags and made her expectations simple. Her voice carried no negotiation. "Clean it out, you can stay. Keep your shift's pay stays in your pocket. Donald and I aren't running a charity, but we're not running a prison either." James worked through the weekend hauling boxes, down sorting inventory, sweeping accumulated dust from corners that hadn't seen light in years. By Sunday evening, the space stood empty except for a cot Barbara brought from somewhere, a lamp and a space heater that turned the room almost comfortable. The first night in that room, James lay awake for hours, convinced something would go wrong. The door would lock from the outside. Barbara would change her mind. Some bureaucratic rule would surface, evicting him back to frozen ground. Nothing happened. Morning came, the room stayed his, and that terrified him more than any of the disasters he'd prepared for. March arrived with temperatures climbing into the 40s, snow turning to mud, the world, remembering it knew colors besides gray and white. James's work at the hardware store expanded beyond stocking shelves. He learned inventory systems, handled small repairs, customers brought in, started recognizing regulars by name. Mrs. Margaret Wilson came in weekly for birdseed and conversation. 72 farm widow with opinions on everything and a directness James appreciated. She cornered him by the seed display on the first Tuesday of spring. Her voice carried challenge. "Patricia says you fixed that old deer." "The one everyone laughed at." James measured his response carefully. "Fixed is a strong word. Got it running." Margaret's eyes narrowed with interest. "Running enough to clear a driveway?" The question caught him sideways. His tractor ran, now barely coughing black smoke and threatening to stall every 10 minutes. But it moved, and the blade attachment Donald had helped him install actually worked. He met her gaze. "Depends on the driveway." Margaret's laugh came sharp and approving. "Mine's 40 yards gravel, needs debris cleared before I can get my car out. You do a clean job, I'll pay $35 cash." The number hit him harder than it should. $35 for maybe 2 hours work, more than he made in a full shift at the store. His pulse kicked up, calculation spinning. If one job led to another, if people talked, if he didn't screw this up completely, his voice came out steady. "I've never operated it beyond the lot." Margaret's expression shifted into something close to respect. "Honest? Good. I'll pay 40 for that honesty." "Saturday morning, 9 a.m. Don't be late." She left before he could overthink it, leaving him standing in the seed aisle, holding a bag of sunflower kernels and something that felt dangerously like a plan. Saturday's job took 3 hours instead of 2. The tractor stalled 4 times, the blade jammed twice, and James discovered his steering needed adjustment when he nearly took out Margaret's mailbox. But by noon the driveway stood clear gravel, showing through for the first time since winter, and Margaret handed him 2 20s without comment. Her parting words carried weight. "My sister needs her backfield cleared next week. I'll give her your number." James walked back to his lot with $40 burning in his pocket and something unfamiliar building in his chest. Not quite pride, he hadn't earned that yet, but the beginning of belief that maybe he could. Word traveled through small-town networks in ways he couldn't track. Margaret's sister hired him, paid 45. Her neighbor saw the work called about clearing a path to his barn, paid 30. A farmer 3 miles out needed help moving equipment, couldn't believe the tractor ran, paid 50 just to watch it work. By the end of March, James had taken 12 jobs and earned $520. He bought replacement parts for the tractor oil and filters and belts that should have been changed decades ago. Stashed the rest in a coffee can hidden under the cot in his room, insurance against the next disaster he knew was coming. Barbara suggested business cards. James thought she was kidding until she showed him the proof: simple white stock with black text, Anderson Farm Services, his phone number below. 100 cards for $15, professional enough to hand out without embarrassment. He upgraded his shelter at the lot, even though he slept at the hardware store now. Built a proper shed from scrap lumber, reinforced the tarp structure, added a wooden platform to keep parts off frozen ground. The work felt unnecessary and essential, at the same time building something permanent in a space the county planned to erase. Brandon showed up unannounced on a Tuesday evening, finding James in the basement workshop cleaning a fuel pump. The footsteps on the stairs carried hesitation, someone who knew they might not be welcome. His voice came cautious. "Heard you're doing good. Got a real business going." James looked up from his work, took in Brandon's appearance. Thinner than before, eyes carrying exhaustion that went deeper than missed sleep. The meatpacking plant job was killing him slowly, the kind of work that ground people down, shift by shift. He set down his tools. "Getting by. You need something." Brandon's expression flickered with something hard to name. "Nah, man, just wanted to see how you were doing. It's good, real good." But his eyes kept drifting to the tools on the bench, the organized workspace, the clear evidence of progress and stability. James saw the calculation happening, the measuring of what Brandon had against what James had built, and felt unease crawl up his spine. They talked for 20 minutes about nothing important. Brandon left with a handshake that felt off rhythm, too tight and too long. James watched him go and made a mental note to lock the workshop door from now on. The call came from a number he didn't recognize on a Thursday afternoon while he was restocking paint supplies. Female voice, professional, with an edge that suggested she was used to getting what she wanted. Her words came direct. "Is this James Anderson, the one fixing farm equipment?" James wedged the phone between shoulder and ear, kept working. "Yes, ma'am. Who's asking?" A pause, like she was deciding how much to explain. "My name's Emily Thompson. I need to talk to you about my father's farm, in person if possible, today." The name Thompson triggered recognition, pulling him back to the auction, to Michael's dismissive laughter. James felt his jaw tighten, old anger surfacing before logic could suppress it. He kept his voice neutral. "Your father wouldn't want my help." Emily's response came without hesitation. "My father doesn't know what he wants anymore, but I do, and I'm the one paying. Can you meet me at the county lot 1 hour?" She hung up before he could decline, leaving him holding a dead phone and a decision he didn't want to make. The silver Honda sat parked at the lot entrance when James arrived, looking completely wrong against the mud and scrap metal landscape. The woman who stepped out matched the car, mid-20s, with blonde hair pulled back, wearing jeans and an engineering firm jacket that marked her as educated and employed. Emily Thompson's handshake was firm, her eyes assessing in a way that felt clinical rather than judgmental. She walked a slow circle around his tractor, taking in the modifications, the evidence of work completed against impossible odds. When she finished her inspection, she turned to face him directly. "My father's farm is 340 acres worth about 1.2 million, but mortgaged to death. His equipment keeps failing. He keeps trying to fix it himself, and he's going to lose everything before planting season if someone doesn't intervene." James crossed his arms, felt defensive walls going up. "Why me?" "There's professional mechanics," Emily cut him off. "Who quoted $8,000 for repairs he can't afford? You fixed this tractor for what, a few hundred in parts? Patricia Moore says you're careful and you're cheap. That's what I need." The praise from Patricia landed complicated, equal parts gratifying and exposing. James studied Emily, trying to determine what she wasn't saying. His voice came careful. "Your dad laughed at me at the auction, called me crazy. Why would he accept help from me?" Emily's expression hardened into something between frustration and determination. "He won't, but I hold power of attorney for farm decisions since his heart attack last year. He hates it, fights me on everything, but the alternative is watching him die, trying to prove he's still strong enough to do it alone." She pulled out a checkbook, wrote $500, held it out. "That's the deposit. Come look at his equipment tomorrow. Give me a real estimate. You do the job right. There's 4,000 more." The number made James's head spin. $4,000 would buy Parts Tools security for months, would transform his business from desperation hustle to actual viable operation. But taking money from Michael Thompson's daughter felt like accepting something that would cost more than it paid. Emily watched the conflict play across his face, her voice softening just slightly. "Look, I know what happened at the auction. Patricia told me. My dad was wrong. He's wrong about a lot of things these days, but crops don't wait for pride, and I'm not watching our family lose everything because he can't admit he needs help." James took the check, folded it carefully, slid it into his wallet. "I'll look tomorrow. No promises beyond that." Emily's nod carried relief. "That's all I'm asking." Thompson Farm announced itself with a sign that needed repainting and a driveway that stretched a quarter-mile between fields, showing the first green hints of coming spring. The farmhouse sat 2 stories, white paint-peeling front porch sagging on the left side. Behind it, a massive red barn loomed, equipment visible through open doors. Michael Thompson stood in that doorway, arms crossed, face locked in an expression James couldn't quite read. When Emily's Honda pulled up with James following in his truck, that expression clarified into something between anger and resignation. His voice carried across the yard before they'd even stopped moving. "You've got to be kidding me. That kid—" Emily got out, slammed her door hard enough to make a point. "Dad let him work or lose the farm. Your choice." The standoff lasted 30 seconds, father and daughter locked in a battle of wills. James understood he was just a prop-in. Finally, Michael turned away, waved a hand dismissively toward the barn. His words came bitter. "Fine. Let's see what the Wonder Boy has to say." The equipment told a story of deferred maintenance and forced economies. A combine harvester sat on deflated tires, hydraulic fluid pooled beneath it in an oil rainbow stain. The main tractor leaked from 3 different points, transmission making sounds that suggested internal damage. Smaller machinery showed rust, where the accumulated neglect of someone trying to make things last past their natural lifespan. James walked the inventory methodically, taking notes, running calculations. Michael watched from the barn entrance, not speaking, but radiating disapproval, so thick it was almost visible. 2 hours of inspection produced a comprehensive disaster. The harvester needed new hydraulic lines, pump replacement, tire work that alone would run $1,000. The tractor's transmission was shot, electrical system barely functional, engine running on borrowed time. Smaller items added up to another 1,000 in parts and labor. James did math in his notebook, crossed out numbers, recalculated, came to a total that made his stomach drop. He walked over to where Emily waited by her car, showed her the estimate. His voice stayed level. Parts are $3,200, labor another $1,500. Total $4,700, and that's with me doing the work at basically cost. Emily studied the numbers without flinching. How long? James glanced at the equipment, ran timelines in his head. 2 weeks if I work full-time. Planting season starts in 3. Michael's voice cut across the yard. Highway robbery. Ferguson tractor quoted 8,000, but at least they're professionals. Emily pulled out her phone, made a call James could only hear her side of. Jerry, it's Emily Thompson. What was that quote you gave us again? 8,000, right? And when could you start? End of April. Thanks anyway. She hung up, met James's gaze. Ferguson can't start for 5 weeks. You can start tomorrow. I'll pay the full estimate plus 300 extra for fast turnaround. Michael exploded from the barn, face red. This is my farm, Emily. You don't get to... Her voice stayed ice calm. I have power of attorney, Dad. Sign the contract or watch everything you built turn into a bank sale. Those are your options. The silence that followed felt combustible. James stood very still, watching family dynamics play out in a language of shared history and old wounds he couldn't begin to understand. Finally, Michael spoke, each word forced through clenched teeth. Do what you want. You will anyway. He walked away toward the house screen door, slamming with enough force to echo across the empty fields. Emily pulled out a contract she'd clearly prepared in advance, handed it to James with a pen. Her expression carried apology she didn't voice. He used to be different. Before the heart attack, before Mom died, something broke in him. James signed the contract, took the check she wrote, felt like he'd just agreed to something more complicated than equipment repair. The work consumed him for the next 2 weeks. James arrived at the Thompson farm at 6 a.m., worked until the light failed, returned to the hardware store to sleep and start over. Donald came out twice, offered guidance on the hydraulic system that saved James from a critical mistake. Barbara adjusted his store hours without being asked, understanding he'd found something bigger than stocking shelves. Emily appeared every day during her lunch break, bringing sandwiches and quiet company. She'd sit on an overturned bucket, eating while James worked, talking about soil composition, or irrigation efficiency, or the economics of commodity farming. Her voice carried passion for the work that her father seemed to have lost, a belief that land could be saved if approached with science and stubbornness. On the 3rd day, while James was elbow-deep in the harvester's hydraulic system, she asked the question he'd been waiting for. Why did you help after what he did at the auction? James didn't look up from his work, kept his hands busy while finding words. Because the land doesn't care about pride. And because I know what it's like when everyone expects you to fail. I won't be that person for someone else. He paused, added quietly, not even for him. Emily's silence felt different after that, thoughtful rather than just companionable. By the end of week 1, James had the harvester operational and the small equipment functional. Week 2 focused on the main tractor, the transmission rebuild that tested everything Donald had taught him. The work required precision and patience, qualities James had to consciously cultivate through frustration when parts didn't fit, or adjustments failed. Michael maintained cold distance, watching from afar, but never approaching, never offering input. His presence felt like judgment without verdict, waiting for James to prove everyone's assumptions correct by failing spectacularly. On the final day, James started the repaired tractor, listened to the engine, run smooth and strong, felt accomplishment, surge through exhaustion. He walked over to where Emily was reviewing paperwork, showed her the checklist with every item marked complete. His voice carried satisfaction he couldn't quite hide. "Done. Everything works." Emily wrote the final check, $4,700 plus the $300 bonus, handed it over with a smile that changed her whole face. "You did it. I wasn't sure you could, but you did." Michael appeared from the barn, walked slowly over to the running tractor. He stood there listening, his expression unreadable, then simply walked away without comment. Emily watched him go, something sad in her eyes. Her voice dropped. "That's the closest he gets to thank you these days." James folded the check carefully, slid it into his wallet next to the others. $5,000 more money than he'd ever possessed at once. Financial security for months, the ability to buy real tools, maybe even look at renting actual space for his business. But the weight of Michael's silence sat heavier than the check's promise. James was loading his tools when headlights swept across the yard. Michael's truck, pulling up beside where James stood. The older man killed the engine, sat there for a long moment before climbing out. His voice came rough, like words were physical objects he had to force out. "Need to tell you something." James set down the toolbox, waited. Michael looked out at his fields, at the equipment now running properly, at everything he'd nearly lost. When he spoke again, his voice carried weight that went beyond the present moment. The confession came slowly. "I was 22 when Robert Williams gave me a chance. Broke angry, convinced the world owed me something. Robert owned 1,200 acres, needed someone to manage 200 of it. Hired me when everyone else saw a kid with no experience and too much attitude." Michael's hands gripped the truck bed, knuckles white. "I got cocky. Thought I knew better than a man who'd been farming 40 years. Made risky commodity investments with his money, sure I'd double it. Instead, lost $50,000 in 6 months." James stayed silent, watching the story unfold. Michael continued, voice breaking. "Robert forgave the debt, every dollar, but he said something I've never forgotten: 'I can't trust you with responsibility anymore.' Then he walked away. No anger, no punishment, just disappointment." The silence stretched. Michael turned to face James directly, and for the first time his expression showed something besides hostility. His words came raw. "I proved him right. Became exactly the failure he predicted. Spent 20 years trying to rebuild what I'd thrown away, and all I've done is dig a deeper hole." He paused, took a breath. "How did you know how to fix that transmission? Same model, same year. It's exactly like Robert's old tractor." James felt the moment crystallize, understanding, connecting pieces he hadn't known were related. "Because I'm fixing Robert's tractor. I own it. Bought it at the auction." Michael's face went through several emotions too fast to name, landing finally on something close to grief. "That machine. Robert said it taught him everything. Said whoever could bring it back to life deserved what he couldn't give." The weight of those words settled between them. Years of history. James was only beginning to understand. Michael's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "I'm sorry. For the auction. For the laughter. For being exactly who I swore I'd never become." James met his gaze, saw the cost of the apology written in every line of the older man's face. "I'm not who I was at that auction either." Michael extended his hand, and this time the handshake felt real complicated and honest. "You ever need parts connections advice, call me. And if—" he hesitated, pushed through. "If Robert left you something, you probably earned it. Don't make my mistakes." He climbed back into his truck, started to pull away, then stopped and leaned out the window. "Robert would have liked you." The taillights disappeared down the driveway, leaving James standing in darkness, with questions burning brighter than any lights. Patricia waited for him after the library closed that Friday, sitting at a table in the back with a stack of newspapers and microfilm boxes that suggested preparation. When James entered, she gestured for him to sit, her expression carrying the weight of revelations about to be shared. Her voice stayed measured. "I need to show you something about your tractor, about Robert Williams." She spread papers across the table, decades of local history organized chronologically. Articles from the 1950s showed a prosperous landowner buying up property. Photos from the 60s captured Robert at community events, shaking hands presenting awards. Coverage from the 70s detailed his philanthropy, how he'd taken in 15 different men, given them opportunities, watched most of them succeed. One article from 1994 stopped James cold, Williams' protege, accused of mismanagement. The photo showed a younger Michael Thompson looking devastated, Robert in the background turning away. Patricia's finger traced the text. Michael wasn't the only one Robert helped, but he was the only one who failed publicly, the only one whose mistakes made the papers. Robert forgave the debt, but the town never forgot. She pulled out older articles, showed James the pattern. Men arriving with nothing working, Robert's land eventually buying their own farms with loans Robert never collected on, a quiet legacy of generosity that transformed lives. Patricia's voice dropped. "My mother was Robert's bookkeeper for 30 years. She kept his private records, knew things he never made public. Before she died, she told me Robert didn't just forgive debts. He tested people, and those who passed—" She paused, met James's eyes. He left them something. James felt his pulse quicken. "What kind of test?" Patricia pulled out a photograph, edges yellowed with age. Robert Williams, sitting on the same tractor James now owned, year-marked as 1952. The photo had been creased, unfolded, many times treasured. Her words came carefully. That tractor was his favorite. He learned to farm on it after coming back from the war. World War II came home in 1946 with nothing bought that dear with his last $200. It represented everything he built, every lesson he learned. She turned the photo over. Written on the back in faded ink, "Faith hidden in the machine." James stared at the words, trying to decode meaning. "What does that mean?" Patricia's expression suggested she'd been waiting years to share this. "My mother said Robert told her he hid his faith in the machine. Not religious faith, but faith in people. Faith that someone would come along who didn't give up, who saw value where everyone else saw junk." She slid the photo across to James. "She made me promise not to tell anyone unless they earned it. You brought it back to life, James. You earned the story. What you do with it is up to you." James drove back to his lot that night, with questions drowning out everything else. He parked under the single streetlight that reached this far, walked over to where his tractor sat clean and maintained running better than it had in decades. The seat still felt different when he touched it, that strange, not quite warmth that defied physics. He'd stopped trying to explain it. accepted it as one more mystery in a machine full of them. But now, with Patricia's words echoing and Robert's photograph folded in his pocket, he approached the search differently. Not looking for what was obvious, but for what was hidden. He started with panels, removing every access cover, checking spaces between metal sheets. Nothing. Examined the fuel tank, the exhaust system, every compartment designed for maintenance. Nothing. 3 hours of systematic searching produced exactly 0 results. James sat on the ground, back against the tire, feeling frustration build into anger. Maybe Patricia's mother had been wrong. Maybe the phrase meant something metaphorical, not literal. But something nagged at him, a detail he couldn't quite catch. The seat. Always the seat, different temperature, different feel. He'd attributed it to imagination, confirmation bias, wishful thinking. Now he approached it like an engineering problem. Climbed into the seat, ran his hands along every surface, feeling for seams or irregularities. Most of the metal showed uniform wear, decades of weather and use, except one section under the right side where the metal felt slightly smoother. Not newer, just different. James pulled out his phone's flashlight, aimed it at the spot. A hairline seam, barely visible following the natural curve of the seat base. You'd never notice it unless you were looking specifically for something hidden. James's heart started pounding. He ran to his truck, grabbed the toolkit Donald had given him, pulled out a dental pick Barbara had included for detailed work. Back at the tractor, he worked the pick into the seam, applying gentle pressure. Nothing at first, then a subtle give metal, shifting almost imperceptibly. He adjusted angle, tried again, felt something click. A panel slid aside, revealing a compartment 8 inches by 12, 4 inches deep. Inside, sealed in plastic to protect against moisture, sat a metal box. James's hand shook as he lifted it out, set it on the tractor seat. The box had weight substance promise. He opened the latch, lifted the lid. Gold coins caught the streetlight, 15 of them, American gold eagles that even he knew were valuable. Under them, papers wrapped in oilcloth. He unfolded them carefully, found a land deed for 40 acres in Cedar County, a leather journal filled with handwriting, and an envelope addressed in fountain pen to whoever brings her back to life. James opened the envelope with hands that wouldn't stay steady, pulled out 2 pages of careful script. The letter began without preamble. If you're reading this, you've done what I hoped someone would. You didn't give up when every rational person would have. That tells me something about your character. But now comes the real test. What will you do with a second chance? He read the full letter twice, then turned to the journal. 80 pages of Robert's handwriting entries, spanning from 1946 to 1997, a lifetime of farming philosophy and personal reflection. The early entries carried optimism. 1946 came home from war with nothing but nightmares and determination. Bought this deer with my last 200. If I can make it work, I can make anything work. Later entries documented the men Robert helped. 1955 took in Walter Green today. Kid has no family, no prospects, but he has hands that want to work. That's enough. The tone shifted around the Michael Thompson entries. 1993 Michael Thompson. Bright kid, maybe too bright. Thinks he knows more than he does. Giving him 200 acres to manage. Let's see if he's ready. Then heartbreak. 1994 Michael lost everything. My fault for trusting too soon, but I've decided not to punish him. Punishment teaches fear. I want him to learn responsibility. forgiving the debt and walking away. Maybe one day he'll understand. The final entry, dated 1997, carried the weight of farewell. I'm dying. Cancer. I've given away most of my land to men who earned it, but I'm keeping one piece, the 40 acres where I started, hiding the deed inside the machine that made me. Whoever fixes it will understand its value. They'll be the kind of person who deserves a fresh start. The real question isn't whether they find it. It's what they choose to build with what they've been given. James sat in the tractor seat, reading and rereading, feeling the weight of inheritance pressing down. $400,000 in land and gold handed to him by a dead man's test he'd passed without knowing he was being evaluated. The money could transform his life, could buy security, stability, the kind of normal he'd spent 18 years learning to live without. Could be exactly the fresh start Robert's letter promised. Or it could be something else entirely. A responsibility, a legacy, a challenge to become something more than just another person who got lucky. He didn't sleep that night, just sat with Robert's journal and the impossible question it posed. Morning brought Brandon to the lot, appearing without warning, like he'd developed a sense for when James had something worth stealing. His eyes went immediately to the metal box sitting on James's makeshift workbench, to the journal and papers spread out like evidence. Brandon's voice came tight. "Found something, didn't you? I saw you out here last night digging around." James stood slowly, positioned himself between Brandon and the box. "You stole from me. Why are you here?" Brandon's laugh carried desperation. "Because I'm drowning, man. Got fired from the plant last week. 3 days from being back on the street, and you're sitting on some treasure like it fell from the sky." The accusation hit harder because part of it was true. James had gotten lucky in ways Brandon hadn't found people willing to help, while Brandon ground himself down in overnight shifts that led nowhere. But the anger in Brandon's voice went deeper than circumstance. "You got lucky. Patricia Barbara, that tractor. You didn't earn any of it." James felt his own anger rise, controlled and cold. "I slept in the snow for 11 weeks, walked 6 miles daily to read books I barely understood, worked until my hands bled, fixing a machine everyone said was worthless. Don't tell me I didn't earn it." Brandon took a step forward, fists clenched. "So what, you're rich now, going to forget everyone who helped you get here?" The question hung between them, loaded with history and hurt. James could call the police, press charges for trespassing, remove Brandon from his life permanently. Would be justified, would be protecting himself. Or he could do something harder. His voice came quieter. "I'm not giving you money, but I'm giving you what I got a chance." Brandon's expression flickered with confusion. "What?" James spelled it out. "Barbara needs a stockroom manager. $14 an hour. Room in the basement if you stay clean. Work 6 months without screwing up. We talk about more." Brandon's pride surged. "I don't need your—" James cut him off. "Yes, you do. I needed Patricia's help, needed Donald's teaching, needed every break people gave me when they could have walked away. That's how it works. You take the help, you do the work, you pass it forward when you can." The silence stretched, Brandon's expression cycling through anger, shame, desperate hope. Finally he spoke, voice rough. 6 months. James nodded. "Starting Monday. Miss a shift, steal anything, lie once you're done. But show up, work hard, prove you're serious, and maybe we build something." Brandon's acceptance came grudging proud, even in surrender. "Fine, but I'm paying you back. Every dollar I took." James extended his hand. Deal. They shook, and James felt the weight of Robert's question settle deeper. What will you do with your second chance? The answer, it seemed, was give others theirs. James spent 3 days alone with Robert's journal before talking to anyone. The inheritance sat in a safety deposit box at Cedar County Bank, legitimized by paperwork, but not yet by decision. The gold, the deed, the weight of legacy all waited while he wrestled with a question that had no easy answer. On the fourth morning, he called Patricia and asked if they could talk after the library closed. Her voice carried no surprise, like she'd been expecting this conversation since handing him that photograph. They met in the empty reading room, spring rain tapping against windows. Patricia brought tea in paper cups, settled into a chair across from him, waited with the patience of someone who understood that important words needed time to find their shape. James slid the journal across the table. I need to know what you think I should do with this. Patricia opened it, skimmed entries she'd probably heard about from her mother, set it down gently. Her voice came measured, choosing words carefully. Robert gave this to you because he saw what you'd do with it. Trust that instinct. He tested people their whole lives, James. You already passed by fixing what everyone else threw away. The reassurance helped less than he'd hoped. But what if I'm not ready? What if I build something and it fails? Patricia's expression shifted into something fiercer. Then you'll have tried, which is more than most people manage. Robert's greatest crop wasn't corn or soybeans. It was people. He understood that land means nothing if there's nobody to work it, nobody to pass it to. She pushed the journal back. The question isn't whether you're ready. It's whether you're willing to become the person this responsibility needs you to be. As James met with Barbara the next evening, after the hardware store closed and Donald had gone upstairs, they sat in the workshop where he'd learned to diagnose engines by sound, where his hands had discovered capabilities his mind hadn't known existed. Barbara listened while he explained the inheritance, the journal, the impossible weight of deciding who to become. When he finished, she poured them both coffee from the pot she kept running through. Closing hours, settled back against the workbench. Her voice carried the practical edge he'd come to rely on. Money is a tool. Land is security. But purpose, that's what gets you out of bed when everything else says stay down. What's your purpose, James? He'd been asking himself that question for days, circling answers without landing. I don't know yet. Barbara's expression suggested she'd expected that response. Then figure it out before you spend $1. Robert left you options, not instructions. You could sell everything, start over somewhere comfortable, could keep it all, build an empire. Or, she paused, let him finish the thought. Or I could continue what he started. Barbara's nod carried satisfaction. There it is, the question Robert wanted you to ask yourself, not what would be easiest, but what would matter. Michael Thompson called that weekend voice gruff over a connection that crackled with distance. James hadn't expected to hear from him again after the equipment repairs had filed that relationship under completed and moved on. Michael's words came halting, unpracticed at this kind of conversation. Emily told me about the inheritance, about what you found in that tractor. James waited, letting the silence stretch. Michael continued, something raw in his tone. I'll tell you what Robert told me once, after I'd screwed up, smaller than the big failure, but enough to matter. He said, the only failure is building nothing when you had the chance. Don't be like me, James. Build something. The line went quiet for a moment. Then Michael added softer, "And if you need help advice connections to suppliers or land agents call, Robert would want you to have people in your corner." After he hung up, James sat with those words, feeling pieces of a plan start to crystallize. Not fully formed yet, but taking shape like morning fog, burning off to reveal landscape underneath. Jennifer Davis had an office above the insurance agency on Main Street, accessed through a side entrance that suggested modesty or discretion. James climbed narrow stairs, found her door marked with a simple nameplate, Legal Aid Attorney. Inside, Jennifer sat behind a desk covered in organized chaos files, stacked but labeled sticky notes forming a border around her computer monitor. She looked up when he entered, gestured to the chair across from her. Her voice carried professional directness. "Patricia called. Said you inherited property and need help legitimizing it. Walk me through what you've got." James laid out the situation piece by piece. The tractor purchase, the hidden compartment. Robert's letter, the journal documenting intent. Jennifer took notes, asked pointed questions about provenance and timeline, examined the deed with an expertise that caught details he'd missed. After 20 minutes, she sat back, tapped her pen against her notepad. "This is actually cleaner than most estate situations I see. Robert's letter serves as a testamentary document showing clear intent. The deed was in his name when he died. No transfer recorded, but the letter effectively functions as a will codicil directing it to whoever restored the tractor." She pulled out forms, started filling them with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 100 times. "We'll file a claim with the probate court, 60-day waiting period for other heirs to contest." But Robert had no surviving family. According to county records, no other claims filed when his estate was liquidated in 1998. Jennifer's pen paused, her expression shifting to something more personal. "You're going to attract attention with this. $400,000 in assets appearing for someone who aged out of foster care 6 months ago. People will talk, some will resent it, a few will try to take advantage." James felt tension build in his shoulders. "What should I do?" Her advice came firm. "Get ahead of it. Be transparent about where it came from, what you plan to do with it. And for God's sake, get a separate bank account before you deposit those coins. The IRS doesn't care about heartwarming stories, they care about documentation." She slid the completed forms across. "I'll handle the legal side pro bono, but you need to think hard about your next move. This kind of money creates opportunity and obligation in equal measure. Make sure you know which one you're choosing." The idea crystallized over the following week, pieces falling into place through conversations and journal entries and the steady accumulation of understanding what mattered. James sketched plans on notebook paper, crossed out bad ideas, refined good ones, built a framework for something that felt both terrifying and inevitable. Williams' Second Chance Farm. The name came first, honoring the man who'd started it all. The model followed from Robert's own approach, but structured, formalized, protected against the chaos of informal generosity. 20 acres for his own operation, sustainable farming practices Emily had taught him about. The remaining 20 acres divided into 4 5-acre parcels, each offered to aged-out foster youth at cost. $10,000 per parcel payable over 10 years at 0% interest. Conditions simple but non-negotiable. Work, the land attend, agricultural education, stay clean, contribute to the community. Support system built in, shared equipment including Robert's restored tractor, mentorship from people who'd taught James, connection to Iowa State extension programs for education, a framework for success that didn't guarantee it but made it possible. James called the meeting at the hardware store on a Tuesday evening after closing. Barbara and Donald came down from their apartment upstairs. Patricia arrived with a folder of grant applications she'd researched. Michael drove in from his farm, Emily beside him. Brandon attended because he'd earned the right through 6 weeks of perfect attendance and careful rebuilding of trust. James spread his plans across the workshop table, detailed drawings and budget projections he'd worked on until 3 a.m. for 5 nights running. When everyone had settled, he laid out the vision in words he'd practiced but still felt clumsy saying. Robert Williams spent 50 years helping people who had nothing. He gave them land, forgave their debts, asked only that they do something with the chance. I want to formalize that, make it sustainable, turn it into something that outlasts all of us. He walked them through the model, the parcels, the selection criteria, the support structure, explained how he'd fund it initially with the inheritance, how it could become self-sustaining through successful harvests and eventual land payments. Barbara spoke first, her voice carrying the weight of consideration. You're talking about creating jobs, infrastructure, long-term commitment. That's not running a business, James. That's building a legacy. Donald wrote on his notepad, showed it around. Robert would approve, but you need help. The question James had been building toward sat unasked between them. He took a breath, pushed through nervousness. I need all of you. Barbara, you understand, money can teach financial literacy these kids never got. Donald, you know mechanics can train them to maintain equipment. Patricia, you have education connections, can link them to resources. Michael, you've got farming expertise, can teach them what actually works. He paused, looked at Emily. And you understand sustainable agriculture? Modern practices, what farming needs to look like to survive. Emily's expression carried something between surprise and pleasure. You want me involved? James felt heat climb his neck, but held her gaze. I want people who care about this. You care. The silence that followed felt charged with possibility. Patricia broke it, her voice matter of fact. I'm in. I'll connect you with the extension office tomorrow. Barbara nodded. Donald and I can handle business education and mechanics, but James, you're going to need legal structure, LLC insurance liability waivers. Jennifer needs to be part of this. Michael's agreement came gruff but genuine. I'll donate some old equipment. Not the good stuff, but working machinery these kids can learn on, and I'll teach if they're willing to learn. Brandon's voice came quiet from the back. What about people like me who screwed up their first chance? James met his eyes. You're here, aren't you? Working, showing up, proving you're serious? First cohort applications go to current foster kids aging out this year, but second round, we'll see who's earned it. The meeting ran 3 hours, evolving from vision to actionable plan. Jennifer joined by phone, walking them through the incorporation requirements. Emily pulled up soil maps on her laptop, identified which parcels would support which crops. Patricia drafted partnership agreements with the extension office. By the time people left, William's Second Chance Farm existed as more than James's midnight hope. It had structure, support, momentum. The county zoning board met the third Thursday of every month in a room that smelled like old carpet and bureaucratic reluctance. James sat in the back row watching other petitions get approved or denied with minimal discussion, waiting for his turn. When his name got called, he walked to the front with his application packet, tried not to think about how much depended on the next 10 minutes. The board chair, a man in his 60s with an impressive mustache and skeptical expression, reviewed the paperwork without looking up. "You're requesting agricultural exemption to subdivide a 40-acre parcel into educational farm parcels. That right?" James's voice came steady despite out his pulse. "Yes, sir. Creating a training program for aged-out foster youth, teaching sustainable farming practices." The chair's expression didn't change. "Zoning code says agricultural property can't be subdivided below 10 acres without residential reclassification. You're proposing 5-acre parcels. That's residential." Jennifer stood from where she'd been sitting beside James, her voice carrying professional authority. Section 12.4.3 allows educational agricultural use with county approval. We're not creating housing, we're creating a working farm with multiple operators. One of the board members, a woman James didn't recognize, leaned forward. "Bringing in troubled kids will lower property values. We've got families in that area." Michael Thompson's voice cut across the room from where he'd positioned himself, deliberately visible. "These kids aren't troubled, they're hungry. There's a difference. I've worked with this young man, watched him turn scrap into success through determination nobody thought he had. Give them the same chance." The debate ran 20 minutes, board members raising concerns about liability, noise traffic, the vague discomfort that came from change they couldn't control. James answered what he could let Jennifer handle. The legal arguments felt hope draining with each objection. Finally, the chair called for a vote. All in favor of granting agricultural exemption. 4 hands went up, 3 stayed down, 7-4 approval, narrow but sufficient. The chair's voice carried resignation. Motion passes. Exemption granted with annual review. Next petition. James barely heard the rest. Jennifer's hand on his shoulder guided him out of the room into a hallway where he could breathe again. Her smile carried satisfaction. "Told you we'd get it. Now comes the hard part." Spring turned to summer while James transformed vision into reality. The 40 acres got surveyed, marked into parcels, each one tested for soil composition and drainage. Emily consulted on irrigation system design, convinced him to invest in sustainable water management that cost more initially but would pay off in reduced operating costs. Applications came from the county foster care system, 17 young people aging out that year. James interviewed each one looking for qualities Robert's journal had emphasized. Not perfection, but willingness. Not confidence, but determination. The hunger that meant they'd work for what they got instead of expecting it to arrive pre-assembled. He selected 4 for the first cohort. Rachel Walker, 18 white girl with a history of placements that failed through no fault of her own, wanted to grow berries. Joshua Martin, 20 white kid who'd aged out 2 years earlier and been grinding through minimum wage jobs, saw grain farming as his path. Amanda Lee, 19 white woman with a passion for flowers and herbs planned to sell at farmers markets. And Brandon Clark, who'd earned his spot through 6 months of perfect attendance and the kind of redemption that came from choosing growth over resentment. Brandon got vegetables. He'd pitched the idea himself, showing James a business plan he'd researched during late-night shifts at the hardware store. The plan wasn't perfect, but it was thoughtful and detailed, and represented the person he'd chosen to become. James gave each of them the same speech Robert had probably given 15 times before, the one about earning versus deserving, about work versus entitlement, about the difference between opportunity and guarantee. His voice carried weight he'd earned through experience. I'm giving you land equipment, access mentorship, and a 10-year payment plan at zero interest. What I can't give you is success. That part's on you. Show up, work hard, learn from mistakes, and maybe we build something that lasts. Give up, stop trying, break the rules, you're done. Questions? Rachel raised her hand, voice quiet but steady. What happens if we fail? If the crops don't grow or we can't make payments? James appreciated the honesty. Then we figure it out together. This isn't about punishment if things go wrong. It's about effort. You try your hardest and it still fails. We adjust, adapt, try something else. But you stop trying. That's different. May brought the first planting. 4 parcels, 4 crops, 4 young people learning in real time what library books couldn't teach. James ran his own parcel as demonstration ground testing techniques, making mistakes publicly so others could learn without their own failures. The work consumed everyone. 18-hour days, backs aching, hands blistered, the kind of exhaustion that felt earned. Emily visited 3 times a week, offering advice, adjusting their approach, bringing the kind of knowledge that came from studying agricultural science while James had been reading repair manuals. Something shifted between them during those visits. Conversations that started about irrigation efficiency would drift toward other topics. Music childhood dreams they'd buried under practicality. She'd stay longer each time, finding reasons to linger after the technical discussions ended. One evening in late June, they sat on the tailgate of his truck, watching sunset paint the fields gold. Emily's voice came thoughtful, almost hesitant. I got a job offer. Colorado Agricultural Development Firm, 40% salary increase. It's everything I've been working toward. James felt his chest tighten, but kept his voice level. That's incredible. When do you start? Emily's laugh came without humor. That's the problem. I don't know if I want it anymore. She turned to face him, and the expression in her eyes made his heart rate spike. 6 months ago I would have taken it without thinking. But now there's the farm, what we're building. James interrupted, gently, needing to say it before courage failed. You have to take it. I won't be the reason you don't chase your dreams. Emily's voice dropped. What if my dreams changed? What if I want both? The space between them felt electric, loaded with possibility and risk. James reached for her hand, felt her fingers intertwine with his. His words came careful. Then we figure it out. But you take the opportunity first. If this is real, it'll survive distance. If it's not better to know now than after you've sacrificed your career. Emily's smile carried sadness and relief. When did you get so wise? James laughed. I'm not wise. I'm just tired of making decisions based on fear. They sat there as darkness settled, hands linked, watching their separate futures try to find a way to converge. Week 6 brought crisis in the form of Joshua's grain showing poor germination. Rows that should have been green showed patchy growth. Whole sections bared dirt. James walked the parcel with him, examining soil, checking for obvious problems, finding nothing. Joshua's voice carried defeat James recognized from his own worst moments. I'm failing. Maybe I'm not cut out for this. James crouched, grabbed a handful of soil, tested its texture between his fingers. Too dense, wrong pH, probably fixable if they moved fast. But the technical problem mattered less than the emotional one. He met Joshua's gaze. "You know what I did when my tractor transmission wouldn't fit? When I'd been working on it for weeks and it still wouldn't engage? I kicked it, threw tools, sat in the snow, and decided to give up." Joshua's expression showed surprise. You never give up." James's laugh came rough. "I give up all the time. The difference is I don't stay given up. Failure is part of the process, Joshua. Quitting is the only real failure." He stood, brushed dirt off his hands. "Donald taught me something when I started learning mechanics. The machine doesn't care about your feelings. It just is what it is. Your job is to figure out what's wrong and fix it. Emotions can come later." They spent the afternoon testing soil, pH, discovering the problem, ordering amendments. The fix would cost $200 and delay harvest by 3 weeks, but the crop could be saved. Joshua's voice came quieter as they worked. "You really thought about quitting with everything you've accomplished." James nodded. "Every day for the first month. Sometimes still. But here's what I learned. Success isn't about never wanting to quit. It's about making yourself show up anyway." The second crisis arrived in week 9, announced by shouting from Rachel's parcel loud enough to carry across the farm. James ran over, found Rachel facing down a man in his 40s, white, overweight, red-faced with anger. The man's voice carried violence barely restrained. "You're not even 19. You're coming home." Rachel's response came steady despite visible fear. "I'm 18, legally adult. I'm staying." James positioned himself between them, assessed the situation. The man had Rachel's eyes, similar bone structure. Family, which made this complicated in ways stranger danger wouldn't be. His voice came firm. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The stepfather's attention swung to James' evaluation and dismissal happening simultaneously. "This is family business. You got no right." James cut him off. "She's an adult on private property. You're trespassing. Leave now, or I call the police." The standoff lasted 30 seconds, violence and restraint balanced on a knife edge. Finally, the stepfather spat at the ground, turned toward his truck. His parting words carried threat. "This isn't over." James pulled out his phone, dialed 911, reported the incident while the truck was still visible. The dispatcher promised a unit within 20 minutes. James stayed with Rachel, watching her hands shake now that the immediate danger had passed. Her voice came small. "He used to hit my mom. Never me, but I saw what he was capable of." The police officer who arrived took statements, confirmed Rachel's adult status, issued a trespassing warning that would make the stepfather's return arrestable. After he left, the other cohort members gathered around Rachel without needing to be asked. Brandon spoke for all of them. "You're not alone anymore. That's what this place means." The solidarity felt fragile and fierce, chosen family, forming from shared understanding of what it meant to have nowhere else to go. Emily accepted the Colorado position in July, start date October 1st. The news landed with complexity neither of them had vocabulary for. Pride in her success tangled with loss of daily presence, hope for the future, wrestling with uncertainty about what that future held. They spent her remaining months building something between friendship and, more, neither quite willing to name it yet. She taught him about crop rotation, soil conservation, the economics of small farm survival. He showed her the business side of the operation, the mentorship structure that transformed land into opportunity. Their first kiss happened on a Tuesday evening, both of them covered in dirt from helping Joshua amend his soil. Emily had smudged earth across her cheek. James reached to brush it away, and the moment crystallized into something Neither had planned, but both wanted. Afterward, sitting in his truck under stars that didn't care about human complications, Emily's voice came quiet. "We're really going to try this long distance." James found her hand in the darkness. "I've tried harder things with worse odds. At least this time I'm not doing it alone." Emily's laugh carried relief. "Fair point. Though I should warn you I'm terrible at phone calls. I'll probably text you spreadsheets instead of romantic messages." James smiled into the dark. "I'll take spreadsheets over poetry any day. At least spreadsheets are honest." They sat there, making promises they hoped they could keep, building futures on foundation of possibility instead of certainty. September brought harvest, the culmination of 5 months' work compressed into 3 weeks of dawn to dark labor. Brandon's vegetables produced $4,200 in sales, split between farmers market and a CSA program Emily had helped him establish. Amanda's herbs and flowers generated $3,800, her market booth becoming locally famous for creative arrangements. Joshua's grain came in late, but strong $2,100 that felt like victory after the germination crisis. Rachel's berries exceeded everyone's expectations at $3,400, her attention to detail paying off in premium pricing. James's teaching parcel produced $5,600, most of which went back into program operating costs. Total first season revenue $19,100. Not enough to call it successful by commercial standards, but enough to prove the model could work. More importantly, 4 young people had property, equity, job skills, community, and the dangerous belief that they could build lives worth living. The celebration happened on the last Saturday of September, community potluck that drew everyone who'd contributed. Margaret Wilson brought potato salad and stories about watching James clear her driveway, that first uncertain job. Patricia arrived with a boxed cake and applications for the Robert Williams Memorial Scholarship she'd established. Barbara and Donald came bearing advice and pride, Donald's notepad filled with observations about each cohort member's growth. Michael Thompson showed up with Emily, both of them carrying equipment manuals for the second cohort. Michael's toast, delivered in a voice that still carried traces of old pain, hit harder than any formal speech. 20 years ago, Robert Williams gave me a chance I squandered. Spent 2 decades hating myself for it. Today, I watched 4 young people seize the chances they were given and turn them into harvests. Robert would be proud. He paused, met James's eyes across the crowd. "I know I am." Patricia's addition came softer, but no less meaningful. "My mother would have loved this. She always said Robert's greatest crop wasn't corn or soybeans. It was people. Looks like that harvest is still coming in." James stood to speak, feeling the weight of 40 people's attention, the responsibility of what they'd built together. His voice came steady, despite nerves. "This worked because none of us did it alone. Every person here contributed something. Knowledge, time, belief, second chances. That's what Robert understood, that I'm still learning. Legacy isn't what you build by yourself. It's what you build with people who care enough to help." He pulled out the journal, read the final entry aloud, so everyone could hear Robert's words. When he finished, silence held for a long moment, before Brandon started clapping, others joining, until the barn filled with applause for a man who'd died 28 years earlier, but whose influence lived on. After the crowd dispersed, James found Brandon by the restored tractor, running his hand along the metal like he was reading Braille. Brandon's voice came quiet, almost embarrassed. "I need to say something. I stole from you last spring, took money tools, broke your trust, and you still helped me." James leaned against the tractor beside him. You paid it back through work. We're even." Brandon shook his head. "No, we're not. Because what you gave me was worth more than those tools. You gave me a reason to stop being the person everyone expected me to be." He pulled an envelope from his pocket, handed it over. Inside, $180 in cash, exact amount he'd stolen. "I've been saving since I started at the hardware store. Let me do this. I need to close that loop." James took the money, understood the symbolism mattered more than the dollars. "Barbara's looking for an assistant manager. $18 an hour, real responsibility. You interested?" Brandon's expression cycled through surprise, suspicion, hope. "You're serious?" James nodded. "You've proved you're serious. 6 months perfect attendance business plan for your parcel. You're taking online classes in agricultural business. That's someone ready for more responsibility." Brandon's acceptance came rough with emotion. "Yeah, I'm interested." They shook hands, and James felt Robert's question echo again. "What will you do with your second chance?" The answer, it seemed, was, "Give others theirs and watch them transform the gift into something bigger than any one person could build alone." Winter came early that year, November, snow blanketing fields put to rest after harvest. James sat in the 1952 John Deere on December 15th, exactly 1 year since Linda Brown had smiled her goodbye and sent him into the world with $147 and no plan. The inventory check felt like ritual comparison point for measuring distance traveled. Then money he could count on one hand, belongings in a duffel bag shelter measured in tarps and frozen ground. Now 12,000 in savings, 20 acres producing a farmhouse small, but his a program that transformed lives beyond his own. He pulled out his own journal, the one he'd started keeping after reading Robert's, wrote his first annual entry in handwriting that looked nothing like the elegant script he was trying to honor. Year 1. 4 people helped. Infinite possibility ahead. Robert's question still echoes, "What will you do with your second chance?" My answer, give others theirs. See what they build with it. Trust that the harvest continues beyond anything I can control or predict. Headlights swept across the lot, a Honda Civic with mismatched panels pulling up beside the shed. James climbed down from the tractor, watched a young man emerge, 17 maybe, white skinny, carrying everything he owned in a backpack. The kid's voice shook slightly. "Sir, I heard you help people like me. My name is Stephen Taylor. I age out next month, and I—" He trailed off, unable to articulate need that went deeper than words. James extended his hand, felt the cycle continue. "Let me tell you about a man named Robert Williams and a $90 tractor." Stephen's expression shifted from fear to fragile hope as James began the story, speaking into December cold that couldn't touch the warmth of knowing he'd become part of something larger than survival. 3 years turned the experiment into institution. William's second chance farm expanded to 80 acres, James purchasing adjacent land with revenue the program generated. 16 participants across 3 cohorts, 14 still farming with success rate that drew attention from agricultural organizations and social services alike. Annual revenue hit $180,000, combined 6 full-time positions, created partnerships established with 3 other counties looking to replicate the model. Iowa State presented their Agricultural Innovation Award in front of an audience that included legislators, farmers, and people who'd once laughed at a kid buying junk. Emily returned from Colorado after 18 months, taking a position with the USDA in Des Moines that let her consult for the farm while maintaining her career. Their engagement happened without drama, a quiet question on a Tuesday evening that she answered before he'd finished asking. Brandon completed his degree in agricultural business, became co-director of the program, brought organization and marketing expertise that let James focus on mentorship. His transformation from thief to partner felt like the truest validation of Robert's philosophy that second chances mattered most when people had to earn them. Michael Thompson, semi-retired, spending 20 hours weekly teaching new cohorts about farming reality versus romantic fantasy. His relationship with James had evolved into something neither quite knew how to name. Not quite father-son, not quite mentor-student, but something genuine that didn't require labels. Patricia established the Robert Williams Memorial Scholarship, funded partially through James's donation, providing educational support for participants who wanted to pursue agricultural degrees. Her role on the program board brought credibility and connections that opened doors initially closed. Barbara and Donald continued their dual role, teaching financial literacy and mechanics, respectively. Donald's stroke recovery had plateaued, but his passion hadn't. His notepad observations about each cohort member's growth more insightful than any formal evaluation. The 1952 John Deere sat in the barn, designated Iowa Agricultural Heritage item, still running, still used in every cohort's first planting. Its hidden compartment remained empty, the golden deed long since transformed into opportunity. But the warmth in the seat persisted, unexplained and unexplainable, a reminder that some mysteries didn't require solutions to matter. James stood before the newest cohort on a September morning that smelled like harvest and promise, 8 young people watching him with the same desperate hope he'd carried to that auction 3 years ago. He showed them the empty compartment, told them the story they'd probably heard in fragments. His voice carried the weight of earned wisdom. The real treasure wasn't the gold or the land. It was the question Robert asked through that letter. When you finally get your shot, what will you do with it? He gestured at the fields around them, at the community they'd built from nothing but determination and collective belief. You all have your shot now. Make it count. Not just for yourselves, but for whoever comes after, because that's how this works. The harvest never ends if you plant seeds for people you'll never meet. The 8 faces watching him carried doubt, hope, fear, determination in different measures. James recognized every expression from his own mirror, understood that transformation happened one choice at a time, repeated until choosing growth became reflex instead of conscious decision. That evening, teaching the new cohort basic maintenance on equipment they'd share, James felt Emily's hand slip into his, heard the laughter of people learning, smelled dinner cooking in the farmhouse that had become home. The question he'd carried for 3 years had answered itself through living rather than thinking. Second chances weren't gifts that arrived complete and perfect. They were raw materials, possibility, waiting for sweat and choice, and stubborn refusal to let failure become identity. He'd been given his by a dead man's test he'd passed without knowing the stakes. Now he gave others theirs, watching them transform land into legacy, hunger into harvest, desperation into determination that built futures on foundation of belief that tomorrow could be different than yesterday. Robert Williams had started this cycle 5 decades earlier with $200 and a tractor. James was just the latest link in a chain that stretched forward into time he'd never witnessed, trusting that the harvest continued beyond any one person's life. That trust he'd learned was the real inheritance. And, like all Robert's gifts, it demanded you earn it every single day by choosing to become someone worth the belief others placed in you.